Hi, welcome to Wake Up, the Truth About Alexa. I'm Lauren Johnson, founder of Alexa is a Human. On this podcast, you will hear true personal stories from people worldwide, sharing the impact that Alexa as a wake word has had on them. You will hear expert opinions in fields such as technology, education, psychology, and more. We will dive into corporate ethics and responsibility, name bombardment, and how Amazon's choice to use a human name as a wake word is causing young children, teens, and women to experience severe bullying, sexual harassment, suicidal ideation, name changes, anxiety, therapy, identity erasure, and more. Thanks for joining us.
Today on Wake Up, the Truth About Alexa, we're going to be interviewing our host, Lauren Johnson. So Lauren, welcome to your own podcast.
Thank you.
So Lauren, since you have been doing this mission for quite a while and you've got 10 really great interviews that you've posted, I thought this would be a really good time to interview you, find out what you've learned since you've started on this endeavor, what it's been like to interact with some of the people, and what are the lessons that you've learned along the way that are going to help inform your future decisions. One of the things I want to start off right away is how much success you've had getting media coverage, participating in media coverage, and the long-term effect that that's had on this effort. What would you say would be one of the challenges of the media coverage that you've worked with?
That's a good question. You're right. We've been lucky enough to be covered, in many places in the world at this point, in the US and, from the BBC, in Mexico, Colombia. We've had great coverage from really big sources and small media outlets as well. But I think what the challenge has been is that the mission itself isn't completely understood. It's one of those things where it's not really a quick hit. You can't necessarily understand the concept or the depth of the issue in 10 seconds. It's more of you have to at least 2 minutes. Of course, I'd like everybody to spend 20. So in regards to the media coverage, what happens is it can sometimes come across in a light that wasn't intended, and it can sometimes be extremely helpful. So it's been a lesson to learn that you can't necessarily control what's going to be written, but at the same time, I know everyone else is so very appreciative of everything that's out there.
I'm glad you've mentioned that. And the reason that I was asking is, number one, I've seen you really grow as a speaker, as you explain the issue, as you explain it to a person who has no frame of reference for what you're talking about. Maybe they don't have a family member or a friend with this name, but also kind of seeing how you've not only grown and expanded as a speaker, but also expanded the contacts for, reaching out to different organizations and people who might not necessarily have a firsthand impact, but might be knowledgeable enough about the issue, or somebody who has this name who's willing to talk and give a little bit different perspective. So I think that's a really huge thing. What have been some of the other main things that you've learned kind of going through this experience?
So I think you just mentioned a couple. One, if you had asked me 2.5, 3 years ago what voice technology was, I probably wouldn't even be able to tell you. And now I find myself hosting podcasts with experts in the technology and voice fields. So that's something I've learned. Also, never imagined myself doing a podcast or really public speaking in general. So when it comes to what I have learned, I don't even know where to begin the list. But it's one of those things where you don't picture yourself. I have, a family that I'm raising. We have 2 children. And I also have a full-time career. I'm in my 18th, 19th year. And so this is all volunteer. And when I've learned that when you're truly passionate about something and you're helping humanity, or doing something for humanity rather, you're willing to put in the hours and you're willing to put in the time. And I'm not the only one. We found an amazing group of people like yourself and, and a bunch of people who are willing to do the work because they see that this is a pure mission. It's genuine. We're not trying to sue people or Amazon in particular for, billions of dollars. We're just trying to right a wrong. We're seeing something that is ethically, morally wrong, and we want to fix it. And obviously, like I said, you're included in that. You've done so much work as well. And it's motivating and it's really empowering.
That's all great. Let's talk specifically about Amazon. What have you learned about Amazon in this time that you've been doing it? Because I've learned a ton as well. What would you say?
I have to be careful not to get sued. No, all joking aside, I knew that Amazon was one of the largest companies in the world. I mean, you'd have to live under a rock to not know that. But what I didn't quite realize was the immense power that they have over not only the general public, but also other large corporations. So, for example, I've spoken with leaders in the tech industry. I've spoken with people who are in charge of building Alexa skills and coding for very large companies, for automobile companies and for speakers. And it's very strange because they wholeheartedly believe in the mission and they understand, how it's an ethical issue and what went wrong. And yet they have handcuffs on them. They really can't do anything because they are contractually bound to Amazon to use just one single wake word, that is Alexa. So it's interesting, and the other thing that people will tell me, especially in the industry, is that they don't necessarily, in the voice industry, I should say, or tech, that Amazon will do the right thing unless they're forced to do so. And so that would be something that really affects their reputation or, of course, their pockets. And this Alexa or I Am Alexa mission that we are working toward, it's not something physical. You can't necessarily see it, touch it. It's not like, we've used this example in the past, but an airbag that doesn't work in a car. It's mental health. It's people that are being harassed, bullied. It's identity erasure. It's things you can't physically see. So unless there's something physical, which would be really unfortunate, it's really tricky for any of these professionals to see Amazon making change. So, it's a little discouraging, but at the same time, it doesn't stop any of us from continuing to do the work.
So you said so much good stuff there. I almost think about what you said and categorize those into groups of people. Like you talked about how the power that Amazon has in all our lives. And it's true, right? So much of the web runs on Amazon Web Services. So much of the way we live our lives in terms of shopping is all about convenience because we know we can order it on Amazon Prime. It'll be here tomorrow or the next day. But then we're talking specifically about a group of people who are in this voice industry who are doing it day in and day out and kind of making the statement, look, it's unless it affects their bottom line. But what you said, I think, is really interesting because as you were talking about that, I was thinking about the first time that PSTD, post-traumatic stress, PTSD, I always get those, and how in that it didn't manifest in physical symptoms that people could see right away. And so it was sort of like, oh yeah, that's just what happens when people come back from very difficult situations. And then over time they realize, no, this is a medical diagnosis, this is an actual thing, sometimes based on physical outbursts or other things that people would do after being in those traumatic situations, but also sometimes no physical signs. And so I think that's very analogous to what we're talking about. I would love to hear kind of your perspective of the people who are in the industry, not only from a voice perspective, but just an AI ethics perspective. What have you seen from those folks or people? And what would you say they need to do or need to understand about this issue?
So that's a really good question. The ethicists that we've spoke to really don't have a grasp on this issue. They're stumped because the ethicists that exist now, they work in voice and they work in tech, but they don't specifically work on this issue. This issue is so unique. It's one of a kind that you're using a human name as a wake word, and it essentially has become synonymous with servant. And so the concept is very well understood by these ethicists, but 9 times out of 10, it's, I understand your issue and I wish I could help, but it doesn't fall under my umbrella. And that's a little bit frustrating because there is no umbrella for this, right? Like this isn't a job. And I think, ethics within voice is somewhat in its infancy anyway, just because the technology and the field is so young, relatively young, but there's really no one in charge. So it's tricky to try and find the right person to help you solve an issue when that person doesn't yet exist.
Yes. I think part of the challenge there is that unless you have this name or have a close family member with this name, it is very hard to conceptualize what it's like day in and day out. And I think to a certain extent, that is a factor. And I also think to a certain extent, the ethicists who work in this space are scared to stand up and say, this is wrong, we need to band together and get it fixed, because that might affect their future employment or future consulting opportunities or whatever. But by the same token, if you're doing what's ethically right, the money should not really be, but then again, I'm not a person who's depending on that paycheck to say that. So it's a tough issue, but I would expect women to understand this issue a little bit more. Would you say you found that from the AI ethicist space, that people who are female can understand this a little bit more than others, or not so much?
Yeah, I guess so. Most of the ethicists within AI have been female, just coincidentally. They have been anyway. I think the idea of women being marginalized, or women and children in this case, is definitely, from what I've experienced, better understood by women simply because they may have experienced it in their lifetime. But I wouldn't say it definitely wouldn't be only women. There are so many men out there that are in both the ethics industry and in voice in general that get this and that, want to make change. But again, like you said, they're afraid to speak up because they might be building skills for Amazon Echo, or they might be, doing consulting work or something like that. And so no one wants to be the squeaky wheel.
Let's talk more about that, the speaking
Okay.
up. No, because I think that's really the crux in a lot of cases, is that you are a voice. There's others who are contributing, but not everyone with this name is speaking up. Not everyone who's a family member who has this name is speaking up. What have you kind of learned about that, and how is that going to inform your decisions going forward?
People are really afraid. It took me a while to get the, I guess, confidence to start speaking up, because you have to let the nervousness wear off, especially if you're like me, not a public speaker in general, or had never done a podcast. There's some nerves that come along with that in the beginning. And then once you get past that, you have to think about the fear of retaliation, right? Because people in general aren't going to understand this right away. When you explain it to them, they are, but there is a fear of retaliation. And I've seen that with the group of people that we've talked to. I mean, if I've talked to 100 people named Alexa, or parents with daughters named Alexa, they want to help. They really do. And they'll reach out and say, what can I do? But when it comes to putting their face on camera or giving their full name and their last name, 99% of them are afraid to, and they don't want to. And I think, some of it comes from a fear of, they don't want anyone to find out that they feel like this, because you have to remember that these women and children have either been dehumanized, in some way, shape, or form. I have, one woman who told me that she can't order a pizza. She can't call for takeout because she can't say her name without getting made fun of, right? So that affects your everyday life, no matter what. And then you have people who have experienced sexual harassment, extreme bullying, suicidal ideation, all these things we talk about, and they don't want to bring those feelings back up. So that's one half of it. The other one is, they're just not willing to put their face on camera. And I understand that, because it takes a lot of bravery to get past that step. So I think I shouldn't say I think. So I've learned that there are a lot of people behind this, and there are a lot of people working on it, but it's going to be my face. It's going to be me, and that's okay. I'm willing to take the hit. If it, to be a voice for thousands of people, if that's what is needed to get this solved, then I am absolutely willing to do that.
I've seen that over the past, as long as I've been working with you. This is not a negative thing on anyone who is, for whatever reason, not comfortable to put themselves out there, or to be more public about how they feel about this issue. And I would say that the pandemic has really taught me that everyone has different levels of comfortability with different things. And there's no sense pushing anybody to do anything they're not comfortable with, because they're going to either resent you or resent what you're asking them to do. So don't,
Yep.
But everyone does need to understand that if no one steps up to do anything, or just one person, is never going to get anywhere. And it's funny, because how much time do we spend in school talking about Rosa Parks and how she refused to stand on the bus or whatever, and wouldn't give up her seat. So I think fundamentally we understand big actions have to happen, but to put yourself as that person who's or to contribute to the big action sometimes is more nerve-wracking than people are willing to deal with, which is fine. Everyone has their own levels of what they're comfortable with. So I would say overall, this whole thing, that's been my my
Yeah.
biggest takeaway. And so in trying to accommodate everyone's level of comfortability, I think that's really going to be for you what is going to keep shaping the future steps that you kind of take. Yeah, that's my
Yeah, no,
thought.
exactly. And then the other thing we have to remember too is that, so we don't know numbers worldwide, but we do know in the US there are 130,000 people named Alexa. Of those, the majority of them, about 80% are age 18 or younger. So now you're asking kids to speak up. I mean, I think it's hard enough for them to do a book report in front of the class, let alone try and, put their voice out to this. So it's a smaller bucket of people that you're reaching from too. When you can't ask children. I mean, my daughter Alexa is 10 years old, and I can't ask her to do this sort of thing. And I think a lot of parents feel that way as well. But I can't imagine myself as a teenager doing this. I don't know about you, but to have the strength, you really have to have a little bit more, unless you're very brave, a little bit more life experience to want to do this.
I understand what you're saying, and it makes sense. And I always think though about, and truly these are one out of a billion, but the Greta Thunbergs and the Malalas of the world, and it's not fair to compare because those are one out of, like I said, one out of a billion or one out of whatever. And so to thrust a child who's dealing with so many other challenges into a very public limelight, potentially to get backlash from $1 trillion organization, that's a scary prospect, right? And so I see why parents would do that. I think parents, even though I'm not a parent, are at the end of the day wanting to protect their children from harm, no matter what, protect your children from scary situations, no matter what. And this is a minefield, so it's definitely understandable. But by the same token, I think someone has to
Right.
stand up.
Right.
Let's just talk quickly, and I don't want to put you on the spot for too much technically, but
Uh-oh.
what actually does need to happen in order for this issue to be resolved, both from a technical standpoint and a branding standpoint? What would you say are the components there?
So I think that's pretty simple. The wake word needs to change, right? And so that's number one. However, I know we all know at this point in our group that won't solve the issue, but the wake word does need to change. The default should change to a non-human name. We have ideas for that. You could have Amazon, you could drop the N and just have, a shorter version of Amazon. You could come up with something that was 3 syllables, or you could come up with something that was just like a AZ45 or a AZ14, right? Someone suggested that on Twitter recently because 2014 is when it came out. So I copied that from them. But something, like that was non-human. We've seen that. I mean, we don't know anyone that named Google. I don't know anyone named LinkedIn. I don't know anyone, with those names. So it's definitely doable. But I think, the real issue is with branding, right? So the fact that it's the ubiquity of it, that it's everywhere. People have said to me, well, this isn't a big deal because my name is so-and-so and I got teased for this and that. I have a brother, Michael, and he, dealt with the Mikey Life cereal when we were younger. And I also did that Michael motorcycle thing to him over and over as we were children. So that was fun for me. And so, these are all very like relatable, normal stories. And then you have, I saw recently online a story from a person in our group, a woman named Maggie. And I think Maggie's and Molly's can relate to a lot of dogs having the same name. And then, someone named Benjamin said to me, well, my name's Benjamin Button and I get teased for that all the time. Everyone has a story, and, including ourselves probably, right? Like everyone has a story, but this is so unique because you're seeing the name just plummet. Everyone's still naming their kid Benjamin. Everyone's still naming their kid Michael. Nobody's naming their kid Alexa anymore. No one wants to name their child Servant. I mean, I wouldn't. No one wants to name their child with something that's going to be synonymous with servant. And, I go back to those people, and it's not to diminish what they've experienced, because I'm sure they've experienced terrible things, but have they truly experienced the identity erasure that comes along with it, right? So was Benjamin Button in every single friend's home, or, and you couldn't even pronounce your own name? Was Benjamin Button in your car? Was Mikey Life cereal, were people directing comments of you every single place you went, whether it was a restaurant or, anywhere you were? So the situation is so unique because it really has only happened to Alexas and Siris. Other than that, no one's really, experienced it before. So, and I am all about teasing. I mean, I've said this before, but, I come from a family of like pure sarcasm. We're from the Northeast, like yourself, right? So this is what we do. And we tease each other all the time. So this isn't like an extra sensitivity thing. It's like just a whole new concept that who would have thought?
Those are all great points. The one thing I did want to ask you about was the recent interview that Dave Limp did, where he talked about the future of this technology and how it will be more aware and more proactive. Can you talk a little bit about what that video was and kind of how you think that will translate into what you're doing?
I don't think I saw a video. I did see a post that they were going to try and that Amazon was going to remove a wake word in general, because in typical conversation, I wouldn't say, like right now, you and I have been talking for, quite a while, and I haven't said Daniel 17 times, right? Like I don't need to wake you up every time to answer me. And so Amazon has thought about the approach of just having something that doesn't utilize a wake word. I do think that is a great idea, but I don't know that it will help with branding. And I don't know, these large companies come up with a lot of ideas. Will it pan out? Will it happen? Will it happen in 2 years? Will it happen in 10 years? We don't know. Will it happen at all? Will it just get squashed? But I think what's important to realize is that we have teenagers, that have threatened to end their lives over this. How long are we going to wait? Right. So it's one of those things where there are terrible things going on in the world. I know I'm going off subject a little bit, but there are terrible things going on in the world, and we can't compare this to those. But for those people named Alexa, it is important. And I think anytime that something is morally and ethically wrong, and then just for me personally, anytime something affects a child who doesn't have a voice, it needs to be fixed. And so I hope that Amazon will do it for the right reason, and not because they want to be, best in show, but because they want to, truly adhere to their customer centric approach, which I don't necessarily see, because I do know that they are fully aware of this. And, they've had plenty of customer feedback on this issue. So I would hope personally that they would change for that reason. But if they want to use the reason to have better conversation with your AI, that works for me, as long as it's done quickly.
As long as it addresses the issue.
Yeah.
Lauren, this has been great doing this interview. I really appreciate you giving us a lot more information and context about what you've learned and what's gone on behind the scenes that you maybe haven't talked about firsthand on the podcast, but just kind of has come through your work and interviews. I know that you're doing Project Voice next week. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, I'm really excited about Project Voice. So it's in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and we'll be down there early next week. And I am on a panel with Alexa Ard from the Washington Post. She wrote an amazing article back in November. So I'm lucky enough to be on a panel with her and with Bradley Metrock, who's the CEO of Project Voice. So yeah, that's coming up. Very exciting.
Excellent. Will we be able to catch that on YouTube if we can't make it there physically?
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely.
Looking forward to seeing that. Lauren, this has been great. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Daniel.